Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akil, and joining me today is Ken Jee. He's a YouTuber, podcaster, as well as the head of data science at Scouts Consulting Group. We touch on personal growth, personal values, and really self-improvement, which are a few of my favorite subjects. I'll put all Ken's socials in the description below. Check him out. And with that being said, enjoy the episode.
Beyond coding.
I know you do the podcast and I know you have a YouTube channel as well, but you also have a full-time job on the side. Like how do you balance all three, man? That's a lot.
So I think balance by definition is a myth. Right? There's no like constant states of balance in nature.
Yeah.
Right? Like the earth is spinning, and then it's moving around the sun, and like everything is in movement, right?
Yeah.
And I think that in life it's the same thing. So some weeks or some months I have to give additional energy into my main job.
Okay.
And some months I give additional energy into the podcast, and some months I give additional energy into YouTube content. And I don't think that there's anything that says I have to do all of those at the same time to the best of my ability. Right.
Yeah.
The nice thing about everything but my main job is it's at my discretion. Right. I gotta make when I feel like it, or I'm the one that it's beholden to. There's no time frame outside of what I set. So when you've created that type of system, you can sort of choose when you put the extra effort into it, and you can front load it. It's like, okay, I know I'm going to have this lull in my work. I'm going to load up on a lot of the content stuff. I'm going to pre-record a lot of podcasts. I'm going to make a lot of videos. I'm going to do whatever it might be. And so I think that that's something that I realized over the last couple of years, is that there doesn't have to be this perfect balance.
I really like that.
If I'm going to go on vacation with my girlfriend, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take 2 weeks off and I'm not going to look at anything. But when I go back, she also knows that I'll probably work really hard and I might not be able to spend as much time on certain days. But as long as you're communicating with the people in your life and you understand that you're going to have to work really hard sometimes, and you can do absolutely nothing sometimes if you set it up correctly, to me, that's a very kind of freeing concept.
Yeah, that sounds very healthy, because in my mind, I can only go on vacation when I've prepared a bunch of stuff, right? I do this podcast. I have another YouTube channel, which I do with my girlfriend and her sister. And then I have just a full-time job going on. And we can only go on vacation, or we can only take time off when everything has been prepared, so we can keep that consistency that we've kind of promised to ourselves and to the people that are kind of tuning in every week, that we can deliver on that. I haven't gotten to that point where I'm like, okay, we can just take time off, but it sounds way healthier of a mindset to have.
Yeah, I think that there's sort of a critical mass you get to with consistency. So I got to a certain size with my YouTube channel where I essentially just did a bunch of polling, and I said, do you care if I have weekly content?
Okay.
What's most important to you? And the most important thing to people is that the content that I make is relevant to them.
Yeah.
Or that they're getting value. And I see it in the metrics as well. So I sort of got to thinking, is like, why am I crushing myself to put out weekly YouTube videos right now if the quality is not going to be as good as it could be, and people aren't going to be getting exactly what they want from it? So to me, it was like, well, I can put less effort into it and make more of an impact if I'm just focusing on the concepts that are most relevant. I don't have to do it as consistently. Like, people are still going to watch it. And to me, that was very freeing. I used to feel very trapped by these deadlines I would impose on myself. Oh, everyone tells you for any content, the most important thing is consistency.
Yeah.
And I think that that's important to a point. If the type of content you're making needs to be consistent, like for the podcast that I make, for example, I make a weekly episode. So
exactly.
The level of effort to do that compared to a YouTube video is way lower. But if everyone's expecting a weekly episode, then consistency is important. But if you're asking yourself the questions, is consistency important in the type of content and the type of thing that I'm doing?
Yeah.
It might not be the case. And then if you're doing that, you're just killing yourself and putting all this extra pressure on yourself for essentially no reason. And I think that applies to your work. I mean, if you're a data scientist, if you're a software engineer, if you're working in any of these professions, some of them are project based. Some of them you can actually put there can be lulls in your work if you plan it correctly, if you are, sprint planning correctly and doing these types of things. Like, you can plan around pretty much everything. And that's the beauty of some sort of like agile sprint system that you're using, or Kanban or whatever type of approach you're using, is that you work in tight enough loops that if you need a break, in a lot of places you can take a break, or you can like budget a couple weeks. It's not like you're planning out 6 months like you used to.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, you are doing some form of planning, but what you do on a week-to-week basis is what you're focusing on. And I think people get really wrapped up in thinking that you have to be so consistent in everything. That's consistency is important, but it's super overemphasized, in my opinion. If we're maximizing for like happiness, if we're maximizing for pure efficiency and output, consistency is probably a little bit better. But I don't think we should maximize exclusively for that type of pure output utility.
Yeah, I agree. When or how do you realize those things? Because you said, right, when you're in the thick of it, or when you're just starting out and you haven't hit that critical mass, you go for consistency, right? You go for output. And at some point you've realized, okay, if I actually want to be happier, I need to be able to let go of this, right? I need to be able to let go of that consistency and focus on what makes me happy, as well as, for example, making the best videos I can, which sometimes requires a bit more time. But that switch that doesn't happen overnight. For me, it's either a conversation or it's something I've read online before I have that realization. When did it click for you, or how does it usually click in that way?
I think for me, and I would argue for most people, it's this feedback loop of experimentation and then introspection. So you have to have some data, you have to do something, and then you analyze it. So I'm doing this consistently over time, and I'm doing it consistently over time. And I have to, after I have some information on if that's been working or not, I have to look and see if that is making my whatever I want, whatever outcomes I want, come to fruition. So whether it's growing in a channel, creating more value for other people, whether it's financial, whether it's happiness and time and freedom, I have to evaluate across those different metrics. And to me, it's just continually iterating on that process.
Yeah.
So I experiment, I try stuff, I look and I say, did that work? Did that not work? If it worked, great. If it didn't work, let's reevaluate and try some different stuff. And I think that that's served me relatively well over time. I mean, I don't have any dreams necessarily of becoming like a massive YouTuber, like a tens of millions of subscribers and doing that as my full-time thing. I'd much rather have more privacy and more, in my opinion, like sustainable, lower effort businesses and be a part of those. I'll still probably make YouTube content at least for the next 4 or 5 years because I really enjoy it. But I'm not optimizing for subscribers. I'm not optimizing for growth in that area. I'm optimizing for, value that I'm creating. And I'm also optimizing for like my enjoyment of the process. Yeah. Like, yes, it's great to make some income and have sponsors and do those types of things, but that's definitely not the whole story. I would not be doing things how I'm doing it if those were my main focuses of just like tremendous growth and income. So it's really important, I think, to just evaluate what levers or what outcomes you care the most about.
Yeah.
And to build a system or experiment to find a system that targets those specifically.
I think that's a very healthy approach. I think not even if you're creating content or doing a podcast, I think even in your full-time job, right, in your professional job, not that all the other stuff isn't professional, that's not what I meant. But I think finding balance in enjoying the things that you do, not overdoing it, not maximizing for output, is very healthy. Because I think if you don't have kind of that mindfulness or that awareness of that, I think that's how people get burnt out. They really just drive themselves through a ringer over and over and over again until their body physically says, we cannot do this anymore. Even though they might be mentally like, okay, let's let's keep going. We've always been doing this. Their body will literally pull on the brakes and say, we actually need to pause here because we can't do this anymore.
Yeah, I like to think of sort of my outcomes as a long-term maximization problem. So I want to do everything that I can at every step of the way to maximize the lifetime value of my decisions. Again, whether that's financial, whether that's happiness, whether that's health, I want to do the things that I can to, again, completely maximize those over the course of my life.
Yeah.
And I think burnout happens when we start viewing those things locally or in a very short time window. Because you're like, oh, in these next 2 weeks, I have to get this out. And then in the next 2 weeks, I have to get this out. And you start running on this hamster wheel. And that's when you're not thinking about the global maximum, you start making trade-offs for these local maximums. And so, for example, if I focused in the next 3 months of only doing one type of YouTube content, I was making a video every day, I would probably grow a tremendous amount.
Yeah.
I'd probably make a lot more money, and probably a lot of these things would happen. But I'd probably also absolutely hate making content. I'd probably ruin all of these things for myself. And whatever amount of money or outcomes that I would create in that short term, they would pale in comparison to what I would do over like 15 years if I stuck with it and I really enjoyed that process. So I think that a lot of people, I'm not saying that they're short-sighted, but it's a lot easier to see these outcomes in the short term rather than seeing these outcomes in the long term. And just expanding your view and zooming out is something that anyone can do that can also help them probably prevent some of the really negative repercussions of or like getting to that burnout phase. Yeah,
I completely agree. I'm thinking back because I'm a software engineer on the day-to-day. And it's really important to zoom out, figure out what the problem is, or figure out what the long-term goal is. But I've never had that realization that it is the same with your life, right? You have a certain goal, or you have goals in life, you have values in there. And what you're doing kind of on a smaller scale, on a weekly or even monthly, maybe even yearly basis, contributes towards that, right? And that short-sightedness when it comes to weeks or months or your self-imposed deadlines, if you don't zoom out and figure out what are we actually working towards, or what is my life going to be like X amount of years down the line, you might lose sight of that. And exactly as you mentioned, you might step on that hamster wheel and actually never get off of it. And then, you run towards your own demise, basically, which is a real shame.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you put a kind of Band-Aid solution on some code to get it to run right now.
Yeah.
Right, your boss is yelling at you. They want you to get this out the door quickly. A client is having a problem with something and they need it fixed right now.
Yeah.
You keep doing that over and over again. And 6 months down the road, you're going to have just a janky code base. And you're going to have a lot of issues that you're going to have to eventually fix and face. And I don't think anybody wants to go through a backlog like that and fix everything. And that's right. And if you take a little bit more time, you do it correctly, you don't have to push back against your boss, but it's one of these things where everyone wants what's best for the company in that circumstance.
Exactly.
I think that there's a way you can have those conversations with your superiors, but also have those conversations with yourself and say, okay, is this going to benefit me in the longer term, or is this a Band-Aid fix, or is this like a short-term like locally optimal thing that isn't going to serve me well in the future? And I would expect people will be a lot more happier in the long term if they at least tried that philosophy out. Maybe it doesn't work for everyone, but I've found myself to be a lot happier when I kept the bigger picture in mind.
Yeah, I can imagine that. You come across as very zen when you just talk about that sort of stuff. And I know, right, from a personal experience, I know Band-Aid solutions don't work well for the long term. It's not what a business wants. It's not foundational in how we want to grow. Yet I've never taken a look at my own life and been like, okay, is this a Band-Aid solution to a problem that I'm having? Or am I actually working on a foundation and working on something long term? Right? I've never had that realization yet. if I'm talking about exercise, for example, I do put in the work so that hopefully longer down the road, I'm still this, how do you say that? I feel great right now. I want to feel great when I'm 50. I want to feel great as long as I age. So I do put in the work on that. So I feel like a lot of times we do that towards the output that we have, not necessarily the life that we experience, which is weird.
Yeah, well, exercise is a perfect example of this concept.
Yeah.
So, for example, when I used to exercise, there's some like hubris or vanity involved, right? Where I wanted to look good. I would work I would bench press and do a lot of the more like showy muscles, right? Yep. And from doing that, I developed a lot of back issues, some injuries, and those types of things. And yes, I was exercising, but I wasn't exercising with longevity in mind.
Exactly.
So now I go see a physical therapist. I don't have any injuries right now, but I go see a physical therapist basically once a month. I check in at are there any muscle imbalances that are going to cause me to hunch over in the future?
Yeah.
I do every morning, just like 10-minute stretches, light exercise that is specifically targeting the areas of my body that are imbalanced, that are going to cause essentially bad stuff in the future. Right? And it's like, okay, I'm doing these things proactively rather than focusing on the exercise that is easiest and has the quickest short-term payoff for me.
Exactly.
And to me, that was, I didn't start doing that until basically this year. And this is a lesson that I had to learn, is like, as I'm getting older, I'm like, wow, I'm like, I wake up and I'm just like sore, and I didn't do anything. Like, my neck hurts and all these things. And I'm like, well, why am I not approaching that like I would the business areas of my life? Why am I not tackling that head on and taking accountability of that and thinking about that in the long term as well? And that's, hopefully, like, I'm not perfect. There are definitely areas in my life where I really struggle with that still.
Yeah.
But that philosophy is starting to bleed into more and more things that I do. And that's something that I'm pretty excited about. I mean, I feel about as good as I've ever felt.
Yep.
In the best shape I've probably ever been in terms of like being pain-free. And funny thing is that since I am doing these like more like maintenance related exercises, I can start doing the other stuff, like actually lifting weights or doing jujitsu or these types of things. And I'm not as worried about injury. I'm not as worried about a lot of the bad parts that come from that, or like the normal things that I would have to worry about with the muscle imbalances that I have. So it's kind of like, handling things holistically allows me to, once I've got the system set up, focus on these more local things again if I wanted to.
Yeah.
It gives me more bandwidth to do the things that give me immediate payoff as well. And so you can sort of get the best of both worlds, which is kind of a crazy thing.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like there's not necessarily, when you go through your educational journey, you learn about a lot of business related things, not necessarily about life related things, but we never kind of touch upon self-improvement, right? Even in a work environment or even in your life, you don't really get a lot of tools to figure out, okay, we improve little by little, right? With an end goal in mind, which we work towards, and day by day or within a habit or within a routine, you get better at that, right? Albeit something physical when it's jujitsu, or you want to get better at it, or you want to get another color of belts. I don't really know what the levels are exactly. Or you're a software engineer and you want to grow into that from a junior to a meteor to a senior position or staff or what have you, right? It's, in some aspects, it's very tangible. And in others, you have no clue. You have to educate yourself, really put in a routine or figure out what works best for you, and then kind of go on that path of self-improvement. How did you figure out what works best for you? And how do you, is it in your habits? How do you improve daily? Is it on a daily basis or a longer term?
Habits are a massive thing. I love to read. I mean, reading has been probably one of the most powerful forces in my life to date. And it so happens that I love personal improvement books.
Yeah.
I got hooked. I think the first one I read, they call them Quake books. So essentially a book that shakes your perspective of the world.
Okay.
The first one I read related to that nature was, I think it was Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins. And it talks, it's more a sort of like a workbook than it is an actual book. But essentially you go through and you audit your whole life. You look at your value systems. You essentially try to diagnose and figure out what motivates you, what's important to you. And there's something very interesting is that the things that are really important to you, they can conflict, right? So if I want freedom, like that's a really important thing to me.
Yeah.
But also I want to be close to my family. Inherently, those two things kind of can conflict, right? So if I want freedom, I want to travel everywhere, and I have a wife and kids, that's probably not going to be as feasible, right? Yeah. And so you have to reconcile the things that are sort of not opposing, but colliding forces in your life. And that really was a great start for me to get to know myself and get to know what I liked. I mean, when we're growing up, we're so impressionable. We like what other people like. We were interested, or we a lot of people choose our careers either because our parents said something was a good career, or we see people making a lot of money, or a lot of these things. And, do we really like software engineering? Do we really like data science? Or is it just what some Harvard Business Review article said was the sexiest job of the 21st century, right? And so I really started thinking about these things, like, what do I actually like? As a kid, what did I like? I like to build things. I was creative, and to be perfectly honest, I was quite lost in high school and most of college. And eventually, it got to the point where I was reading and consuming a lot of this information, and essentially all of these books, they say, hey, here is like the framework to work from, but you have to do a lot of work yourself, right, to figure out exactly what is your motivation. And motivation is weak. What is your not passion either? Like, what is your driving force? What is your purpose? Right. Yeah. And to me, I was able to hone that down and figure out, once I had that, a way to build off of that. And so habits are a way you reinforce that. There's a lot of really good systems that allow you to maximize on that and get to your goals as efficiently as possible. So a couple books I really like are in terms of habits. First, we have the Power of Habit and Atomic Habits. Those are really powerful ones. Then you have, for actually getting things done, probably my favorite one is called The 4 Disciplines of Execution, and also The One Thing, which I have not been doing a very good job of this year. But that's also a part of the introspection that I need to be doing and figuring out and having these audits of my life. So, reading has been a big portion. And then I will also say, I've said this a couple of times, a couple other places in college. I was like in my junior year, and I had completely lost. All I wanted to do was play golf. I wasn't really dedicated to it. I was partying a lot, just sort of wandering through. And I got a call. I was like super hungover one morning. My dad calls me up, and he tells me that my cousin had passed away, who was a year older than me, who was 22, I think, at the time. And I just turned 21. And he passed away from like a freak heart attack, right?
Really?
Yeah. And so to me, it was just like a massive pivotal moment. I essentially went from saying, okay, if he could pass away, and a lot of people take these things differently. I mean, there's someone who could have taken that and said, life is meaningless, if anyone could go anytime, and I'm just going to like coast. But I, for some reason, took it as a sign that I had to make my life meaningful because I didn't know when things could end. So I should really pursue excellence in everything that I did, because that's what I have control over right now. And that gave me this very aggressive sense that I need to get what I want out of life while I'm here, because again, anything could happen in that sense. And then that's when I went on this really aggressive reading tear. That's when I really started to look for purpose and understanding. And I'm still really aggressively on that journey. I've by no means made it anywhere, but I like to think that I'm further along, and I'm quite enjoying the ride as it goes.
Yeah. There are these kind of pivotal moments in your life, and I think everyone has that. If you think back, something happened and something completely changed, and there's a distinct few, right, that I can remember. There's this first time I heard a gunshot because the jewelry next to us, the place where I was working at, got robbed in the middle of daylight, and I was 16. The guns are not really common in Holland, and it was panic on the streets. Right, when I was even younger, there was a period where my dad almost passed away because he had a brain hemorrhage. In college, twice when my mom had cancer. Like, those are pivotal moments when I think back in my life that things shifted, right? My perspective on life shifted, my mindset shifted. I needed to grow up. That's kind of what I took away from it. That's how I reacted. I needed to grow up and get my shit together, especially because I am the oldest of four, right? My youngest brother is 16 years younger than me. He just turned 11 2 weeks ago. And yeah, your life, all of a sudden, you get a reality check. I don't really like the notion of a reality check, but that is what it is. That's how it felt to me. All of a sudden you realize, yeah, things can be over and they can go real quick. So the life that you have, the seconds that you have, you got to make them count in whatever way you want it to be. Pursue that.
Yeah. And, I should note, so my cousin was like the closest person in the world to me at the time. We were close in age. He like lived with us. It was like it was pretty brutal. But I also want to make it clear that I don't think people have to have something terrible happen to them or something like terrifying and necessarily like life shattering to be able to grow from adversity. Yeah. And to be able to make a change in their life. So something, as we mentioned before the show, obviously I have like a wicked black eye and I'm a little scuffed up, but I've gotten really into jiu-jitsu recently. And what I love about that is that every time I go in, you do live sparring and you're put in to these situations where you're just every night, I go and I get my butt kicked, right? And I have to go in and I like put myself in this situation where I know I'm probably going to get, just starting, I'm going to get my butt whooped quite a bit. But I know I'm going to come out of it alive. I know I'm going to improve and get better because of these things. And you can fabricate these scenarios, like running a marathon, like doing any of these like intense physical challenges. That's probably the lowest hanging fruit, where you can prove to yourself that you've done something very difficult and you've gotten through it. You've taken on this adversity and you've been able to overcome it, and that can give people an incredible amount of perspective. Right. Something that was very similar in my mind as well is, after I went to grad school for business, I did consulting for a little while, and I'd never really written a line of code. I did some Code Academy, and then I applied to do a master's in computer science. And so going into that degree, I had no concept of the field. It was completely foreign to me, but it was something I felt like I was really interested in and wanted to do. Right. And I was able to graduate that. I think I had almost a perfect 4.0. I got like an A-, and coincidentally, it was in a machine learning course. So I graduated with almost a perfect. It was like 3.99 GPA. But I digress. But that's something, I went into this completely new field, and I felt like I was able to learn it and pick it up. And at the time, and I still feel that way, if I was able to go into this new domain and learn this field, which from the outside looking in is very difficult, what couldn't I do? Especially if I didn't have any of these like parallel skills. Yeah. And the idea behind that is like we're constantly building our experiences. We're constantly building this mental notebook of things that we've accomplished. Or things that we've gotten through, or things that change our perspective. And if we continue to do that over and over again, we become a very resilient and proactive and hopefully impressive person that can overcome any sort of adversity and also essentially achieve what we want out of life. And I think that that's something that has really stuck with me, is that if I can make it through the hard things that I've gone through, if I can achieve the things that I've achieved in the past, what could I achieve in the future if I follow the same script?
Yeah, I really like that mindset of, right, it doesn't matter if you don't have the aptitude for it. As long as you put your mind to it, right, you apply yourself and you are consistent with that, you can be better at something, right? You pick a random thing that you've never done, pottery, or I don't know, cooking is an amazing example because that's a thing you can do daily. You can get better at a lot of things, right? You just have to pick and spend the time that you have in that, right? I always wanted to play an instrument when I was young. I never got the chance to for various reasons. But now I don't pick that up because I feel like I'm already so far behind that when I start now, it's going to be so long before I'm even apt at, for example, playing piano or playing guitar, right? But that already upholds me. That already prevents me from getting good at the first place. Like I can actually do that if I apply myself and if I put in the time. There's nothing preventing us. I mean, there are exceptions, sure. But in most cases, there's nothing preventing you from doing what you actually want to do, as long as you put in the effort, right? You are still in control of that. You just have to decide and make a choice.
Yeah, I mean, to that, maybe an iteration on that point, but it's interesting, everyone that I know, there's something impressive that you've done. Maybe you just don't think it's impressive, right? And we all have this. Maybe you hit a high score in a video game, or you had some experience that you were able to overcome.
Yeah.
Maybe you were put on the spot in the classroom to read out loud, and you did like a really good job. It doesn't matter what it was. There are things that you've done that you can build on. There are things that you've achieved. There are things that were difficult and you got through them. And we forget to look at those things. We forget to go through to remind ourselves of the things that we've accomplished very frequently. And we also forget to frame the bad things that have happened to us as things that we've overcome as well. And I think that, putting in effort is in order to build a larger portfolio of things that you've accomplished. And then that portfolio is what takes you to success in life. This is maybe like one of my favorite people to read or listen to is this guy, David Goggins. And he talks a lot about this, where it's like everything you do is training for the next thing that you do.
Yeah.
Like anything, right? That's a really cool philosophy, I think, to have.
Yeah, I agree. It's a journey, right? And everything you've accomplished, everything you've experienced is experience, right? That's why I love talking to people that have done job transitions. I love working with them because they bring that diversity to the table, right? I haven't had the most traditional background in getting to a software engineering position, nor have my peers, but some do. But what we bring to the table is very different, right? If it's life experience or the way you've grown up or the country you've been involved in or have grown up in or have experienced even in a minor or like a monthly period, you all bring that with you. It is all perspective in what you're doing. And that is part of what makes you as a person, uniquely you. And I think that just adds a lot to the table. It makes it more enjoyable to be around, makes it more enjoyable to have that conversation with. Because I think there's always something interesting in someone, right? It doesn't matter if they're even twins and they have the exact same background. There's still distinct few differences that you can find in there. And if you have the curiosity that drives you, you can have an amazing conversation, I think, with those people as well.
Yeah, I forget who said it, but nobody can be you better than you.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And again, I think people overlook that too much, right? I mean, there's something inherently unique or valuable about your story and your perspective. You just have to kind of do your homework on yourself and figure out what it is.
Yeah, that introspection is sometimes really difficult for me. what I love about the things that you say is, right, sometimes you need to stand still and look at what you've accomplished and actually be proud of that, right? Or look at the things that you've overcome and be proud of those. I love it when someone randomly gives me feedback and says, listen, that was a really difficult situation. You handled it beautifully. Or that was a really difficult situation. These are the things that I noticed, right? Because those I can take with me. I can either be proud of or I can use that to improve myself. I don't think I do that often enough. Give feedback to other people when I'm proud of them or when I really appreciate what they've done. I think I can do better there, but I really appreciate it when people do that to me. Like I have distinct few memories that people have done that, I mean, they're memories. I can still remember them. So they've stuck with me throughout the years, which is really cool, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think that gets into maybe another circle where it's like finding the right people around you is what I think also drives a tremendous amount of success. I've, over the past 2 years, have been able to surround myself with people that I think are motivated or they have very similar values to what I have. Yeah. And I can talk to them about a lot of the things that I'm struggling with, a lot of frankly, they can also help with a lot of the things that I'm working through and trying to improve upon. I have a whole group of people that also create YouTube content.
Yeah.
And they're honest with me if there's something that seems off or that they don't really like or something that I can do better, they'll tell me. And part of that process is getting checked and being humble enough, hopefully, to iterate on things and also stand your ground when you need to. Right. If there's a change that I don't think is relevant, I'll say, okay, I'm still going to do it the way that I proposed, but thank you so much for the feedback. I really genuinely appreciate this. And, it's easier now than ever to find those people.
Exactly.
Right. If you want to, let's say you want to prepare for a software engineering job or a data science job. There's so many places on the internet where you can create a study group or where you can find people that are working on the same thing you are or, any of these types of things. There's, Reddit forums, there's websites, there's Discord servers, there's Slack channels, there's all of this stuff. And that for me is one of the ultimate life hacks.
Yeah.
Is because I think motivation is unbelievably fickle. One day I might wake up feeling like I want to do something, and one day I might wake up and say, I don't want to do anything all day. I just want to sit here.
Yeah.
And one of the best ways in my mind to create motivation or create a reason to do something is to have other people hold you accountable. And just, telling someone you're going to do something and not doing it and disappointing them, to me, is one of the worst feelings in the world. Maybe right. Other people don't mind that, but that's a lever I know I can pull and say, oh, wow, I'm going to let this person down. I'm okay with letting myself down, but I'm not okay with letting one of my friends down or some of these other people down. So I better get this done.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I hadn't realized it, and it's throughout this podcast that I've kind of more and more realized it. But what's really cool about now, the time that we have, is that we have digital communities, right? Where you can find like-minded people in whatever hobby or profession you have, right? To learn from, to motivate each other, to have a dialogue, to have a conversation, right? About anything, which is incredible. Because if you would not have that, you have your local town, your city, your province, or your country, and there's only so many people that are exactly with that same mindset, with those same hobbies as you, and you would have to find them individually and surround yourself with them physically if we wouldn't have that digitally. But since we do have that, there are so many avenues for you to communicate, express yourself, befriend people that are like-minded. I think that's incredible. And I hadn't realized that actually before, I think a year ago. I think it's really cool that we have that.
I mean, just for a thought exercise, let's say I go to a bar down the street. I live in Hawaii. What are the odds that someone in that bar is a data science, or maybe even a data scientist, or maybe even a software engineer?
Yeah.
Right. like maybe software engineer probably higher, but like let's say a data scientist, like maybe 1 in 15 of like all the people there. Probably it's not a very common profession here. Most of it's concentrated in like high tech areas. What are the odds that I actually run into that person? Unbelievably low, especially in a bar setting. What are the odds that they're also interested in content creation, which is something that is very relevant to me, even lower? I can go, I've met 50 people this year that are interested in that intersection of those things. And it's been really easy to connect with them or like algorithms that are recommending these people.
Sure.
It's fascinating how much more efficient it is to meet people online. And I've probably made more high quality friends and I consider high quality friends that I share values with. So I think that there's like 3 levels of friends. So first is by like acquaintance, like you live next door to this person in college.
Sure.
Right? Oh, the proximity, right? Then you have shared interests. So I live next door to this person and we both love surfing.
Right.
And then you have, we're both unbelievably excited about education and teaching, and we have a similar purpose. That's like the top level where you have alignment there. But I've been able to find more friends of that type this year than I have my entire life combined, probably.
Yeah.
And it's all through the power of essentially the internet and LinkedIn and YouTube and these different platforms.
Yeah.
Which to me is wild.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree. Do you think there's a downside to that as well? Because as we move more towards digital, our kind of physical relationships, or even saying hi to your bus driver, for example. I mean, I travel a lot with public transport here, so that's kind of normal in my area of the woods. Or even saying hi to people on the metro or helping each other out when someone has a problem. Yeah, I think people sometimes put up the walls or want to be in their bubble or want to be on their phone, and they kind of forget that there's still also a physical world out there. And even a simple smile to someone you pass by can bring you happiness. And without realizing that, without actually contributing back or giving back to the fold in that way, I think there's also a downside to that. Yeah.
I 100% agree.
Yeah.
I think that technology, having essentially the world at your fingertips in your pocket, makes it really difficult to leave that world.
Yeah.
Right. So you're in line at the shopping market. Everyone's first instinct is to just look at their phone and sit there and wait. Right. There's no mental downtime.
Right.
There's always constant stimulation. And I think that that's inherently just terrible for people. If we're always stimulated, if we're always looking at our phones, if we're always on Instagram, if we're always on any of these websites, we're doing very little of that introspection that I believe is so important because we don't have time to. I mean, if you think about the history of humans, there's been so much downtime. Like it got dark early, depending on where you were in the world. And what are you going to do? You just literally sit there.
Yeah.
Right? That is an inherent part of the human condition is just boredom. And we don't have boredom anymore. It doesn't exist if you have a cell phone. Or it doesn't exist in the like how it's evolved or like how it historically evolved.
Exactly.
There's a great book on this called by Cal Newport. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Digital minimalism.
Okay.
Is what it's called. And it talks about how essentially technology in some sense is really not great for our mental health or productivity or any of these things. I will say I'm a big believer that you either use technology or it uses you.
Yeah.
So if I'm on any of these social platforms, it's not for my enjoyment. I view them as essentially like business platforms.
Okay.
Right? Like, yes, I enjoy the creation process of YouTube, but YouTube is the medium to get the videos that I create to other people to create value for them. And of course, there's educational benefits and those types of things. But that all goes under you using these platforms rather than you being a giant eyeball for them to show ads to.
Exactly.
Right? And making that differentiation and just like thinking when you're scrolling Instagram, am I using this? Like, is there utility in me scrolling? Am I going to remember scrolling through this. Am I going to remember this meme that I saw and I sent to my friend 5 years from now? Or is this a waste of my time? Yeah. And I'm slowly starting to think more and more like that. I'm still like, I go through these phases where I delete Instagram for like 3 months and it's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And then I download it again because I'm like, oh, I really need to make a post about something. And then I'm just stuck in just scrolling loop. So that's an area I'm really working on.
Yeah, no, same here. So throughout college, throughout high school even, I never wanted to engage because I just didn't see the benefit, right? Facebook was one of the first things. We had Hives before that, which I think is a very distinct Dutch one, which is exactly the same as Facebook. I never had that because I was like, okay, I know you guys. I don't have to see the best version or all the highlights of your lives. If I want to engage with you, I'll engage with you in that way. I don't want to see a digital profile of you, nor do I want to put a digital profile of myself in there and constantly update it, right? I would constantly be busy with that. So I never had Facebook, never had Instagram, never had Twitter. Instagram I barely have now just because I have kind of YouTube as a side thing. So I do kind of engage with that a little bit, but then I have other things. Like LinkedIn is a big bad one that's been there recently because I love engaging there. And to me, it's interesting content, right? It might be content that I do remember or I might reflect on and be like, huh. But yeah, I can also scroll endlessly. So I've decided to offload all the apps that are have been toxic in my relationship or I've spent too much time on, in my personal opinion. And I'm kind of detoxing right now. I'm in that phase where I'm not in there. Sometimes I download it and then I'm like, okay, time to offload it again. Still working on it bit by bit. But all of a sudden, I realized I have way more time. And that's a really awesome feeling. That I'm like, man, I do have more time. How did I create this time? What did I do before this? Right? Those thoughts. Yeah, I think that's the benefit of kind of offloading or detoxing yourself from those apps sometimes.
Yeah, well, we started this conversation with how do I balance or how do I manage all of these things?
Yeah.
And to me, a lot of it is I do a lot of the things that I enjoy. I really love my work. I really enjoy the content that I create. I really like talking to new people on my podcast. I really enjoy a lot of these things. And over time, I've just had less enjoyment in things that I believe waste my time.
Yeah.
So every now and then I'll watch like a Netflix show or something like that. Right now, we've been watching the House of the Dragon, which, comes on Sundays, but I virtually watch no TV. I just feel like if I sit down and watch TV, I'm like, well, I'm not going to get that time back. And I just feel guilty for watching it now because I'm like, oh, I could be working on something that I probably enjoy more and also would have greater utility in the long run for me.
Yeah.
I try not to play any games, although I've recently found a couple card games online that I'm getting sucked into, and I'm like, because some strategic card games, there's a lot of strategy and it scratches like a mental itch, and maybe I can justify that by it's like, oh, I'm critical thinking. I don't know if I can go that far, but it's like, I always go back to this thing is like, well, do I enjoy this? If I enjoy it and its utility in that sense, and it's like stress relief, that's fine. But if I'm just doing it for something to do, and there isn't any long-term benefit, why would I do it at all? Yeah. And that's generally where social media, or a lot of scrolling type social media, is falling more and more. Again, definitely not perfect. I still have some, I'm in one of these phases where I have Instagram on my phone right now.
Exactly.
I'll probably delete it after this episode, but yeah. So I think that's, if anyone listening, just ask yourself, am I using these apps or are they using me?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thought. I can already imagine a scale of being plotted of things that I enjoy and things that are time sinkers and things that I actually want to sink time in because they're beneficial for the long term, or I sink time in just as a time sink. And that's a shame because we only have finite amounts of time, right? If you think, oh, my life flies by, hopefully it flies by doing the things that you love or doing the things that really stimulate you in a form of a hobby or a form of a passion that you have. Hopefully it doesn't fly by and you blinked and you're like, well, man, what did I do all this time? And sometimes I feel like that happens a bit too often. I do have then again, I need some trigger points. I need to either have a conversation or I need to read something on LinkedIn or online or anywhere that I'm like, okay, I need to get my stuff together again because it's been a time sink. But we go through iterations and we get better at it, I guess.
Yeah, something that's scary to me is that I haven't had one in a while, but the idea where you have a day and it was just completely unmemorable.
Okay. Where
essentially nothing, maybe you did some work, maybe you did whatever one day, but there is no story that came out of that day. There's nothing meaningful about that day of your life. Right? It was just completely mundane. Every day, I'd like to be able to remember every day of my life. I'd like something meaningful to happen every single day. And it's up to me to do things that are memorable every day or meaningful every day is probably a better perspective. And I read this book called Storyworthy, and the guy essentially talks about how a little background. The guy who wrote the book, he's won this storytelling competition like 20 an unprecedented 20 times.
Nice.
It's a Moth Storytelling Slam, and he goes through what are all the elements of a good story. And a good story doesn't have to be like the craziest stuff that happens. It just has to have a moment that is human and relatable and meaningful. And every day he does this exercise where he writes down what the interesting story was that he lived that day. And he's been able, if you have something meaningful that happens every day, you remember every day, and that the more memorable your life is, probably the more meaningful it is. And, it'd be pretty cool to go back through when you're in your deathbed and remember every single day what happened, what made that day special, what made your life special. To me, that's a life really well lived if you have that ability. We usually only remember the really good parts or the really bad parts, but every day I would hope that there is something special about it.
Yeah.
Whether it's just something good that you ate, or it was, you got caught in a rainstorm and, you're drenched, but your significant other made a funny joke when you came. There's these little moments of our life that can be so significant, but we always just pass them over. And there's something to be said about capturing them and I don't know, just like making them live on. Because I think I just get so scared when I have one of these days. I look back, I'm like, what did I do today? Did I do anything at all?
Yeah.
I'm like, I guess I worked on XYZ work thing and yada yada yada. Like, am I gonna remember that at all in 20 years? Probably not.
No, it's a weird thing how our memory works. But I think Gilbert mentioned this. A previous guest that I had was that he's trying to journal every single day about his day, anything interesting that might happen. And he says, well, the benefit of that is that he becomes better at storytelling, but also you remember your day more fondly, right? It contributes to that happiness again. And I like that you mentioned, right, it doesn't have to be a huge thing. You don't have to go out of your way and do something wild. It can be in very minor details, right? Little interactions that you've had or little realizations that you've had. I walk around and I'm like, I've never seen this. Like, I genuinely have never seen this. Or I have those realizations that this is the first time I'm doing X, Y, Z, or I'm doing things differently. I'm stepping out of my routine. And I'm like, that was also a thing. Or I'm in a different street that I've never been to. Right? Those little things are part of your journey and that you do on a day-to-day basis. I think capturing those, first of all, might be a fun exercise. I said that back then. I haven't done it because, man, journaling is just, I see an uphill battle for me personally. But I think it could be very interesting.
Get a pen you really like. That helps.
Yeah. I don't like my handwriting. That's the thing.
Gilbert Eichenbaum?
Yeah, that's the guy.
Yeah. I told him to read that book, and I think he did. So
I love how it goes full circle. Yeah.
Full circle. Yeah. Gilbert's awesome. For anyone who is listening to this one, definitely check out that other podcast.
Yeah.
I've also had him on my show. So
awesome.
Just a great guy and a great book that he wrote as well.
Yeah, I fully agree. Let's round it off here, man. I think time flew by, which usually means it was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for joining. Is there anything you'd still like to share?
Yeah, if anyone wants to learn more, I don't always talk philosophy. I often talk data science and some of these other things. You're welcome to check out more on my YouTube channel. It's just my name, Ken Jee. On my podcast, Ken's Nearest Neighbors. And I believe Patrick will also be on the show there if you want to hear more from him. So really excited to be here. And I really enjoyed this conversation. Maybe it sounds maybe it's really vain if I enjoyed a conversation because I was talking so much, but that's okay, you know.
That's hilarious. I will join you there. I really enjoyed this conversation as well. Thank you again, Ken, for joining us, and thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next one.